5 things you'd never survive in the Old West. Behind the myths of cowboys and gunfights was a harsh world of lawlessness, unforgiving land, constant conflict, deadly diseases, and sudden violence. Most people today would not last long in that reality. Number 1. Life without law. Life on the frontier ran on thin law and thick nerves. A lot of towns didn't have a full police force, and many counties were so big that one sheriff and a few deputies were expected to cover hundreds of miles of bad roads. Federal help existed on paper, but marshals rode long circuits and papers moved slower than gossip. If someone robbed you on Monday, the warrant might ride out on Friday, and the trail could be cold by the time anyone showed up. Most people learned fast that safety was personal. You slept light. You kept a dog that barked and a lamp you could light in a hurry. You chose neighbors with care because a steady neighbor was worth more than any courthouse far away. Towns tried to keep order with rules that fit their reality. Many places banned weapons inside the main streets because merchants wanted families to feel safe enough to shop and settle. Travelers checked guns at stables or left them with the sheriff, picked up a token, and went about their business. That sounds strict, but it was practical. When a payday crowd came off the trail, half drunk and armed, one loud word could turn the street into a shooting gallery. Even then, rules only worked if someone enforced them. Some lawmen were brave and steady. Others cut deals, took favors, or looked the other way when a friend crossed a line. A badge carried weight, but it also made you a target. Plenty of officers died in the street doing a job that paid little and offered less backup. When the formal system fell short, people built their own. Ranchers formed posses to chase horse thieves across open range. Mining camps wrote codes to settle claims without a judge. In cities rocked by graft or sudden crime waves, citizens organized committees that could be swift and rough. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't fair, but they believed it beat watching their town fall apart. Violence still flared because pride, whiskey, and money make a nasty mix. Yet the West wasn't non-stop chaos. Some boomtowns learned to calm down after the first wild years, and homicide rates rose and fell by place and season. The bigger truth is simpler and harder. Most people were on their own most of the time, and the margin for error was razor thin. A careless word in a saloon could follow you out of the door. A night watch skipped for a few hours of sleep could cost a herd or a life. Modern habits don't map well onto that world. We rely on quick calls, body cameras, and a stack of rights we barely think about. On the frontier, the right that mattered most was the one your neighbors respected and your town could actually defend. If you lacked judgment, patience, or allies, the West had a fast way of teaching you, and the lesson often arrived with boots on your chest and dust in your mouth. Number 2. The harsh frontier. The land did not meet you halfway in the Old West, and most days it felt like the place was trying to throw you off. Heat pressed down for weeks, with no shade beyond your hat brim. Then winter snapped in, and turned breath to frost, and trails to traps. Shelter was whatever you could raise with what you had, which often meant a dugout, or a sod house cut from the prairie itself. Thick earthen walls kept out wind, but they leaked in a storm, shed dirt on food, and invited bugs and snakes through any careless gap. Families lived tight in 1 or 2 dim rooms, fighting dust that never really left and patching roofs after every hard rain. Water decided whether a town lived or vanished. Wells soured. Streams ran thin or swelled without warning. Travelers learned the hard way that some pools were heavy with alkali and could drop an animal or sicken a child fast. Crossing bigger rivers was worse. Wagons tipped on slick stones. People drowned in currents they thought were shallow. If you got through the water, disease waited on the other side. Food and waste often sat too close together, and one sick camp could poison the next. Cholera tore through wagon trains in a matter of days. Dysentery and fevers lingered for weeks and left people too weak to travel or plant. Even when you stayed healthy, the pantry stayed close to empty. Cowhands and freighters ran on beans, salt pork, coffee, and whatever a camp cook could stretch in a Dutch oven. Far from timber, families burned whatever would catch, including dried buffalo chips, just to boil water or warm a room before dawn. The sky piled on. Prairie fires ran with the wind and jumped roads like they were nothing. A stray spark from a cook fire or a passing train could turn a dry valley into a wall of flame, and there was no engine company coming over the hill. Then came blizzards that arrived out of blue sky and dropped the temperature in an hour, trapping people in wagons or schools and freezing anyone who guessed wrong about the distance home. Years turned hard when the rain did not. Crops failed in long droughts. When the fields finally greened up, locust swarms chewed them bare and moved on, leaving barns full of hope and bins full of air. The grind was constant. You hauled water, watched the horizon, and kept tools close because something always broke at the worst time. Modern comforts make all this sound dramatic, but for homesteaders, it was ordinary life. You measured risk with every mile and every mouthful, and there was no guarantee the land would give back what you put in. Number 3, native conflicts. The Old West was not empty space waiting for fences and town squares. It was a mosaic of nations with their own laws, alliances, and economies, and those worlds collided once rail lines, homesteads, and mining camps pushed into homelands that had been managed for generations. Pressure built fast. Treaties tried to draw boundaries, then gold strikes and new routes ignored those lines, and trust evaporated. The slaughter of the buffalo crushed the food base on the plains and ripped out the core of trade and ceremony, which turned hunger into anger and fear into raids. Some forts acted as hubs for diplomacy and exchange, and scouts and traders built relationships that kept local peace for a season. But the larger current ran toward confinement on reservations and the breakup of tribal autonomy. Violence followed the pressure. Raids hit wagon roads and remote ranches. Retaliation fell on native camps, including people who had sought protection near posts. Names that show up in textbooks were life and death on the ground. Sand Creek exposed how a promise of safety could turn into a dawn attack. Little Bighorn showed that native coalitions could beat federal columns when they chose the field and read the terrain better. Wounded Knee marked the end of the Army's campaigns and the start of a long era of forced control. Policy shifted at the same time. When Congress ended treaty-making with tribes, it signaled that negotiation would shrink and unilateral rules would grow. Families caught in the middle did what people do in dangerous borderlands. Some moved at night and kept fires low. Some traded for protection and information. Some joined scouts or militias. Many just endured. What makes this part of the West hard to survive is not only the flashes of battle. It is the grind of uncertainty, the fast changes in policy, and the way a single mistake at a ford or a bad read of the horizon could pull a small group into a much bigger storm. Number 4. Deadly diseases. The West could feel like open sky and clean air, but the real killers were often in the water bucket and the crowded room. People moved in large groups, shared wells and cooking spots, and handled waste without the rules we take for granted. That is why stomach illnesses spread so fast. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid rode the trails with emigrants and could empty a camp in days. You might seem fine at breakfast, then collapse by dusk because no one knew to boil water, rehydrate properly, or separate latrines from the creek. Smallpox added a different kind of terror. Vaccination existed, yet coverage was patchy, travel was constant, and some officials enforced rules only after outbreaks started. Whole communities lived with the fear that one traveler could bring a rash that scarred faces or ended lives. Measles and influenza also swept through wagon trains and boarding houses where families slept close to strangers. Tuberculosis moved slower, but lasted longer. Doctors sent patients west, chasing dry air, and sanatoriums grew into an industry around rest, sun, and strict routines. Some people improved because fresh air and better nutrition helped. Many did not, because there were no antibiotics to finish the job. Everyday care carried its own risks. Childbirth took a heavy toll when midwives and doctors lacked sterile technique and hospitals were far away. A bad tooth could turn deadly if an infection spread. Ether and nitrous oxide existed, but outside cities, pain relief and antisepsis were hit or miss, and tools were not always clean. Patent medicines filled the gap with big promises and hidden ingredients like alcohol, opium, or morphine. People felt better for a while and sometimes got hooked, but the real diseases kept moving. Germ theory slowly changed practice after a few landmark discoveries. Yet, acceptance lagged on the frontier. With no antibiotics, few vaccines in regular use, and sanitation that failed under pressure, survival often came down to luck, clean water, and the distance to help when a cough or cramp turned into a crisis. Number 5. Outlaws and violence. The danger most people picture is a noon duel in the street, but the West's violence was messier and more random. Trouble came from ambush on a dark road, a saloon fight that got loud, or a coach stopped by men with bandanas and shotguns. Stagecoaches and later trains carried payrolls, gold, and mail, so robbers watched the routes and the calendar. Wells Fargo paid for guards and hired shotgun messengers to sit up front and keep a short-barreled gun across their knees. Most holdups were fast and chaotic, and a lot of people who died never saw who pulled the trigger. Town life was safer, though not safe. Many cattle towns passed gun ordinances that forced visitors to check weapons at a hotel, livery, or with the sheriff. Merchants wanted families in the streets, not gunsmoke over the boardwalk. Those rules cooled the worst nights, but they did not fix the bigger problem. There were too few lawmen for too much land, and outlaws could cross a county line faster than paperwork could follow. U.S. Marshals, Texas Rangers, and local sheriffs did ride after gangs, but they often arrived after the blood dried. Some famous names built their reputations in that gap. Jesse James and his crew turned wartime skills into peacetime robbery. Billy the Kid's legend grew in a world where juries were nervous, witnesses were scarce, and jails were thin-walled. The flashiest shootouts became legends because they were rare, not routine, yet everyday risk stayed high enough to keep tempers tight. A boast, a card game, or a bottle too many could end with a body in the dust and no one eager to testify. The myth says skill with a six-shooter decided everything. The record shows something colder. Survival hinged on reading rooms, choosing routes, knowing when to swallow pride, and living with the fact that help might be miles away when a stranger decided you looked like easy money.